So let's continue our discussion of the diaspora in antiquity by looking at Mesopotamia. And although we saw that Egypt was an incredibly important center of Jewish settlement, Babylonia is perhaps more distinguished because it is the location of the forced resettlement of Jews, which was the original home of the patriarch Abraham, but nevertheless Jews were forced to live there in the context of the invasions of the Assyrians and the Babylonians in the 8th and the 6th centuries. Those 2 centuries were periods in which there were forced removals of Jews from Israel to the region of Babylonia, and it's more appropriate to use the term exile or galut in that context, but even those exiles were partial. They only represented a small portion of the overall population. The majority of the population remained behind in Israel, impoverished, probably gender imbalanced because men may have been taken in greater numbers than women, but otherwise many Jews, the majority, still remain behind in Israel. Now, here's a look at a map, and you can see where the arrow is pointing to the region of Mesopotamia. That term, as I've said before, represents the area between the rivers. That's what Mesopotamos means, between the rivers. And it's sometimes called simply Babylonia, although that's a term that obviously changes over time. Let's zoom in here to a passage from Jeremiah, in which he famously says, on the occasion of the 6th century exile to Babylonia, he says, "Thus saith the Lord of hosts," this is Jeremiah 29, verse 4, "the God of Israel, unto all the captivity whom I have caused to be carried away captive from Jerusalem unto Babylon, build ye houses and dwell in them, and plant gardens and eat the fruit of them. Take ye wives and beget sons and daughters, and take wives for your sons, and give your daughters to husbands, that they may bear sons and daughters, and multiply ye there, and be not diminished. And seek the peace of the city, whither I have caused you to be carried away captive. Pray for the Lord for it, for in the peace thereof shall ye have peace." This is kind of like the mission statement of the concept of exile in the Jewish tradition. The notion that this exile, is galut, this diaspora, to use a neutral term, is something that is God ordained, and that Jews are to commit themselves to the lands in which they now live, to work to build it up with houses and vineyards and so on, to raise families there, and to pray for the welfare of the government, which of course is part of the standard ritual of the synagogue to this very day. But at the same time, we should understand that this represented a huge theological, spiritual challenge for Babylonian Jewry, because up until now, although the Jews worshipped an invisible God, their only conception of God was one in which God was associated with a particular place. Now they were in a foreign place. Were they somehow abandoned by their God? I know that much more modern thinking understands the concept of God as universal and as not being connected to a specific place. But in the ancient period, there's lots of indications to suggest that Jews would be worried that now perhaps their God, was not interested in taking care of them in an exiled land. That's why Jeremiah's prophecy rang so famously throughout the generations as a measure of consolation for their newfound exilic condition. Now, what's going on in Babylonia in the period of antiquity that we're looking at? So one of the most fascinating collections that we have from the period is the so-called Murashu archive. Now, this represents 730 clay tablets from the 5th century, from the Bnei Murashu, which is a banking family. It's not impossible that they are Jewish, but there's no real data to prove it one or the other. However, when archaeologists go through these cuneiform tablets, there are lots and lots of names, right? It's a business archive with receipts and agreements and contracts and stuff like that. About 8% of the names mentioned in this massive archive are Jewish. And the way they tell is because they are so-called theophoric, meaning they invoke the name of the Jewish God right built into their own ways of referring to each other. My own children have theophoric names. It's very common. If you have a name like, let's say, I don't know, Jonathan, right, means God-given, right? They all like invoke the name of God in some kind of like active way. And so it's relatively easy. It's not foolproof. It's a pretty good sense that these are probably Jews. So there are 8% of the names in this archive are Jewish, and they're located in 28 out of the 200 place names mentioned there. There's another collection, by the way, that refers to a place that seems to be like a concentration of Jews called Al Yahudu. Yahud, of course, would mean Jewish, and there's lots and lots of theophoric names in this separate collection as well, which was discovered quite some time after the Murasho archive was unearthed. One of the things I find really amazing about the Murasho archive is not only are the names theophoric, but Jews always use a patronymic, meaning one is normally named with a given name, son or daughter of one's parent. In most circumstances in Jewish practice, one is named after one's father, not after one's father, but one is named by one's father. So for example, my Hebrew name is Hillel, my father's name is Yaakov, so I would be Hillel ben Yaakov, right? Hillel, the son of Yaakov. In almost all usages, you would rely on your father's name, but under certain circumstances, you would refer to your mother's name. The reasons for the distinction are not going to delay us today, but what's really fascinating is if you look at the individuals named and their patronymics, and you see, is there a change in the theophoric nature, you can see that there's a real seam that something happened around the year 480 before the Common Era, in which all of a sudden these Jews who have regular Babylonian names start giving their children super theophoric names, as if they have suddenly discovered religion, and they are much more intent on making sure that their children identify as Jews. It's really interesting. And in fact, that continues for several generations. But what would happen if all of a sudden you had all these Jews that had like really secular names, like let's say, I don't know, Chad or Thomas or something that's really not Christopher, right? Really not especially Jewish names. And then all of a sudden their kids get named like, Eliezer and Chana Rivka and Sarala. What happened? It seems that around the year 480, for reasons that we don't know, there is a real Teshuvah movement, and they start giving their children much more Jewish names, and their grandchildren get Jewish names, and so on for quite some time. I just think that's cool. But let's go on. What did the Jews do? So the Murasho archive, because it's primarily dealing with business and receipts and things like that, doesn't give us a lot of detail about the nature of their lives, but it does say a lot about what kind of occupations they were involved in. It appears that there's a strong contingent of Jews who are active in the military, which is fascinating that in a diaspora condition, you wouldn't necessarily immediately think of that first, but we see that in Egypt. We see it also in Babylonia. Jews, of course, involved in animal husbandry, shepherding. Well, that sounds like a traditional Jewish pursuit, right, with David and Moses and so on. Jews are involved in buying and selling real estate. They're involved in government service, like they're operating businesses on behalf of the government or so on. And we even have a significant population of Jews who are actually enslaved. There is a Jewish poor. It's not, one can't imagine that the vast majority of Jews are sort of like upper middle class. No, rather they are more middle class and lower in this archive. So much stuff to talk about. I wish we had more time. So let us just conclude a little bit by thinking about the political organization of the Jews in Babylonia, because this would, unlike Egypt, ultimately become the next great center of Jewish culture. And that's what we're going to be exploring in just a few weeks. There's a slow and steady growth of communities after Bar Kokhba. They move from Israel and they make their way to Mesopotamia, and this increases the population. There will be a significant amount of travel going back and forth between the major centers of Jews in Israel and in the Babylonian region. There are the so-called Nechute, which refer to rabbis who leave Jerusalem to go to Babylonia and teach the rabbis in Babylonia what they're saying in Jerusalem, and sometimes they go back and forth many times. So there is an increasingly large population there. There's a significant cultural impact as well, because this is a process that started hundreds of years earlier, but Aramaic, as the state language of the region, becomes the literary lingua franca for much of the Eastern Mediterranean, and of course it will be the language of the Talmud as well. Aramaic is, by the way, the Jews write it with Hebrew letters. Other peoples write it with different letters. And it's a Semitic language. It's not too far away from Hebrew in its grammar and structure, and even most of its vocabulary. It's probably sort of like French and Italian, or French and Spanish are close to each other, as Hebrew is to Aramaic. We'll come back to that when we talk more about Babylonia. The organization of the Jews in Babylonia was quite sophisticated. They had something called the Reish Galuta, or in English, the Exilarch, the head of the exile. And again, I want to postpone a major discussion of this until a little later on in this next semester, but this is basically a figure recognized by the Parthian Empire as the head of all Jews in the region, and respected by the Jews, although sometimes they get into conflict with their leadership, in particular as the academies begin to grow. They'll really only take off in the 3rd century, but the various great academies of study, which will ultimately produce the Talmud, often get into conflict with the Reish Galuta. Nevertheless, just like we saw with the prayer for the government, there's also a prayer for the Reish Galuta that is included in every Sabbath service in Aramaic in contemporary synagogues as well. But you shouldn't think that it's all, sort of organized and working together effectively. We have some fascinating stories. Josephus gives us a lot of details of 2 brothers from the famous city of Neharda named Anileus and Asineus, who decided to just, go off on their own and create, for about 15 years, their own kind of like robber state, which was kind of like they were warlords, and these were Jewish guys who maintained kind of like regional independence from the Parthian army, Parthian Empire, until finally the Parthians took care of it and destroyed the robber state. Fascinating kind of swashbuckling guys. More to say, but I think it'll take us too far away from our topic. Okay, that's Mesopotamia. One more short lecture about the diaspora coming up. Thank you for watching.